Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Figma for EDU monthly workshop. My name is Miggy. I'm joined by Alex. Today, we're going to be talking about making auto layout components in Figma. We're going to talk about responsiveness, and we're going to get started down here. So if you take a look, this is the starter file that we have. This first page, you'll notice that we have those intro slides. We also have a number of slides from the auto layout playground. This Figma auto layout playground is a file that walks through the ins and outs of auto layout. This is produced by the advocate team. So I actually did work on the Figma auto layout playground. There's another page here as well. So on the left-hand side, you will see a page, auto layout component example. This is an example that we built up in a previous workshop. However, it's going to be augmented by a number of new features. And we're going to be walking through all of the steps to consider how to make components more responsive. When we talk about responsiveness, what we're talking about is how your content can appear across various devices. So if we look here, what I have is an auto layout container. This is containing these components. These components inside of this container, when I resize this container, you can see how they then behave. And you'll see that at smaller sizes, we go from this sort of two column to single column content approach. These cards are made using Figma, using auto layout, as well as some newer features such as aspect ratio lock to get a more realistic experience in how you craft those. So I'm just going to show you really quick when I duplicate one of these instances. Once again, a component is a reusable object in Figma. So when you have this object, you have an instance of it. That instance is essentially a copy that still retains a relationship to its original. So here we can see that we have all of this content, as well as over here on the right, you'll notice there's a number of component properties that allow you to modify that instance. When you take a look at it, I can turn the image on or off. I can resize this, and I can even begin to edit some of that content with the image. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about auto layout components. This is akin to something that you might see on Pinterest, and you can see that we're using images, we're using type, we're using other smaller components such as these little tags that you can see here. And one of the interesting things is we're using a concept of minimum and maximum values, and as well as auto layout wrap. So we're going to cover all of the concepts needed to create this. And I'm just going to show you one cool thing that can also be done with these. So you'll see that it already has a bunch of placeholder content. Now, when I duplicate this, so if I press Command D or Control D, if you're on Windows, I've just made a copy. I'm going to put another copy down here. Right now, I'm going to demonstrate one of Figma's AI features. Not all AI features are going to be available on education teams, but I want to demonstrate this so you can see the potential when making your mockup. So I'm going to create a duplicate here. I'm going to press Shift A. Shift A is going to take these two components and place it inside of a vertical stack auto layout frame. Now, when I select this frame, and let's say I duplicate another, right? Let's see here. I will get this little bar. This little bar is kind of like the magic duplicator. It's a repeater. It's going to allow me to create multiple items. And when I do so, there's going to be this option here with Figma's AI that's going to take a look at the existing content and then replace it based off of the first two instances. So the reason that you can build up these components as you're kind of working here, there's a lot of flexibility and power when making your mockups. And then if I wanted to replace some of these images, I'm going to press Command Shift K. I'm going to grab some images from my computer, my desktop. You might not be able to see this at home, but I'm just selecting the images. They're then going to be placed here, and I can easily replace them with photos that I had on my computer. So this is kind of like the North Star of where what we're trying to accomplish, and we're going to dig into that in just a moment. Just wanted to show you some of the power of bringing auto layout components into Figma, and then also making them responsive. Let's say if I take these two components here, I press Shift A, I'm going to wrap them inside of their own auto layout frame. I'm going to adjust their direction, and you could see now that I have like one item here and then the two up. This is going to be the power of auto layout. This is going to be the power of componentizing your designs. So then this way you can start kind of architecting it at a higher level. So now that we've kind of seen what's possible, let's go back to step one. So actually really quick, I saw someone ask, how do I activate that command? I'll show you that really quick. The command is basically activated by having two items that are the same in succession. And then when you put them into an auto layout frame, Shift A, right? So the auto layout is now added. The container recognizes that there's two of those similar items. It understands that nested inside of those items, there's content, right? So there's a sense of continuity there. And then here, there's going to be this little bar. And what that bar is going to do is going to allow you to create additional ones. So once again, this is going to be available to those who have AI enabled in their account. So if you have a pro account, you should have AI enabled at this point. However, on EDU, it's not fully available, just kind of showing you some of the power that is capable. And then once you do that, you're going to get a little prompt down here that says replace content. And by doing so, I can either press Command Return, or I can click on that button. And what it's going to do, it's going to evaluate the content inside of those components that are sequenced within that auto layout column, replacing all of the content within. And we're going to go back to the point of creating these, and then we're going to cover those as we move forward. All right, so we're going to begin by talking an introduction to auto layout. Auto layout is going to give you the ability to basically keep elements aligned either horizontally or vertically. And when you think about responsiveness, there's actually a few things that we need to consider beforehand. And I have these kind of basics here. So when we're resizing elements, and when we're talking about resizing, you need to think that, so many of the devices, so many of the screens that we design, they need to consider the device that they live in, their container. So when we think about resizing an image, when we think about resizing an icon, when we think about resizing text, we need to consider, how it's responding to its container, how that container is responding to a device. So I'm going to cover a few quick concepts here. So we're going to demonstrate aspect ratio lock. Aspect ratio lock was dropped in Figma in January. So it's still a relatively new feature. It's something that should have been there all along. It replaces the concept of constrained proportions. And what I mean by that is when I select this image, you'll notice when I resize it, right, that image fill is currently set to fill. So it's going to do whatever it can to fill that space. I select that image. I come over here. Let me make my UI just a little bit bigger, so those of y'all in the back can see a little bit better. I'm going to select this frame, come over here to fill. When I click, you see that there is a fill on this frame. There's different ways to manage how an image fills that image or that frame. And so when it resizes, we're basically cropping it, right? It's doing the best that it can to fill up that space. Now, when we come over here, there's a new option, lock aspect ratio. And when I enable lock aspect ratio, what it's going to do, it's going to keep the width and the height permanently locked in. So now when I scale this, you'll see this little visual across the middle that's showing that as I'm resizing either the width or the height, that it's going to do whatever it can to keep the image at those dimensions. So that's going to be an important concept moving forward. And it's something that we haven't necessarily covered in previous Figma for EDU workshops because it is still relatively new in Figma, but it's something you need to be aware of and how it behaves and whether or not you do want this behavior enabled or disabled. So once again, when I resize the width of this container right now, the image fill is doing everything that it can, and it's only resizing in one dimension. However, when I enable aspect ratio lock, you will see this little line come across the middle. So for the purposes of today's demos, we are going to favor aspect ratio lock for our visuals. And same thing here. So I have an icon that's sitting inside of a frame. When I resize that frame, I have aspect ratio lock turned on, and you'll notice that the icon that was created inside that frame is scaling. The reason that's doing so is whenever you have objects inside of a frame, you need to architect how they will behave when the parent container resizes. So here, when I select this map icon in here, you'll notice over here on the right, the constraints. So if you don't see the constraints panel, you can see this little toggle that will turn it on and off. Effectively, what that panel is doing is instructing the things inside of this frame how to behave. So if I were to create another little frame here, I draw a little shape here. When I say left and top, when the frame resizes, that object stays on the left and top. If instead I move it to the right and the bottom, right, the constraints are then going to tell that object to go on the right and the bottom. Now, if instead I choose for this item to be scaled and scaled, right, and then I also tell the parent container to lock aspect ratio, you will see that it will now scale according to that frame. So when you're building out your graphics, when you're starting to build out, think of like your smallest pieces and how they're going to behave. So for the image, we have lock aspect ratio. For an icon, we could set lock aspect ratio onto that frame or even onto any of those elements. You will see that option is going to be there. So we're thinking about how things resize, and that's going to be important once we begin to use auto layout. Same thing here when you think about text. So if I was to have, let's say, a single line of text, there are three different options for resizing with text. There's text that grows by the width. So as I type in more text, it's going to continue to grow. That's going to be essential when you're creating auto layout buttons, right? Then there's going to be auto height. So auto height is when you have a paragraph of text and the width then determines how the text gets resized. So there's going to be instances where you just want a single line of text to then grow the auto layout horizontally, such as a button. But there's going to be times when you have a block of text that when the width of that text resizes, that the height then grows to fill that space, because you don't necessarily want the text itself to resize. You want that text to kind of maintain its size for readability at certain sizes. So that's something to consider. So when you're working with text, be mindful of the text resizing. And at any point, these can always be adjusted on Canvas. So here, if I select this paragraph, the second that I resize that paragraph, it's going to switch from auto width to auto height. If I was to double click on the right hand side of that text field, it now then goes back to auto width. And if at any point in time I extend the height of that text field, it will then instead go to a fixed size. And that fixed size is going to impact the text that is viewable in that container. So just be mindful of how that is going to get applied and think about how you want your sort of objects within auto layout to resize. So A couple quick shortcuts: auto layout frames. You can enable them using Shift A. There's also a newer option called suggest auto layout, which is Shift Control A. I'll show you the shortcut for where that is. It allows you to create more complex auto layout objects. It does not use AI. I've demonstrated this before, and someone was like, "Oh, that's using AI." And I'm like, "No." They're like, "Well, how do they code it then?" I'm like, they just wrote the logic for it, because it's something you could still totally do. You could still totally write your own code and your own logic for how something behaves or performs. So mind blowing, right? So here, if I was to take this, actually, I have a couple examples over here to the right, and I'll show you how that works. I'm actually going to hop over here to let Figma suggest auto layout frames. I'm going to use this as the way that I'm going to show you how auto layout is going to benefit you. If I take a look at this card currently has no auto layout applied. When I resize its width, or when I close this width, you notice that the contents of that card are not responding to it. So if I were to decrease the width, maybe I want that to extend its height, or when I increase the width, I want it to fill that container. That's a concept known as resizing. So here, if I was to apply single auto layout, what it does is it creates a stack of elements either vertically or horizontally. So to create this, I'll show you as an example. I'm going to just copy that element. So auto layout either works by stacking objects vertically. We're going to use that shortcut key, Shift A. I'll notice when I press Shift A, it says auto layout added. I look over here to the left, I could see frame. Let's give it a good name. Let's say stack example, right? You can see it's applied, and auto layout is then going to have all of these properties, allowing me to have those objects go left to right or top down. And when they are top down, when I resize it, you can see that the objects are responding to the width that I have there. We also have the ability to change the gap between those objects. And if I increase the height of one of those objects, let's say I turn off aspect ratio lock, you can see that those other objects then respond, right? That's going to be the benefit of auto layout, is you're not going to be constantly needing to move everything around. It's going to move based off of that behavior. Now, if I was to take a complex card like this, and I press Shift A, you'll see that it won't work properly, right? What it's trying to do is wrap all of those elements, and it's not going to create a complex layout. In order for this to work, I would need to go in here and manually kind of put objects together. I would make this into an auto layout frame. I would make this into an auto layout frame. I would make this into an auto layout frame. I would then stack all of these vertically. Now that I have these rows, then I can select the whole card and then press Shift A. And then now I may have the auto layout that I'm trying to accomplish. And then you'll see that, okay, maybe even these objects here, I want to make sure that, they're spaced out correctly, right? So to make this sort of auto layout driven, I would need to do a bit of work to break that down. Suggest auto layout is a relatively newer feature. It came out last year during config. I know a lot of people aren't aware of it. They're not necessarily using it on a regular basis. But if I was to right click on here, come to more layout options, the suggest auto layout option is going to take a look at the arrangement of elements that I have inside of this frame. And it's going to basically do that same behavior that I just did, where I wanted to create rows of content and then the column of content. So create auto layout or suggest auto layout, when it automatically or auto magically creates the auto layout for you, you'll notice over here in the layers panel, you can see the little dots demonstrating which new frames were created. So if you do need to make any edits, and if at any point you do want to remove auto layout, you can always right click, come down here, and remove all auto layouts, right? And that's kind of like, somebody was asking this on Twitter the other day, like, I just want to destroy all the auto layout in a file. You can also press Command K or Control K on Windows and type in remove all auto layout. And once again, that's going to take a look at all of those nested frames and then break them out as just normal frames again. But once you do that, it's no longer responsive and fun. So let's just undo, select the card that I have here again. And there we go. And once again, if you notice, we're talking about that concept of aspect ratio lock. This is a placeholder for like an image or media, and you want this to behave with aspect ratio lock. You can select it and then come over here and enable or disable that. With aspect ratio lock disabled, right, the width just kind of follows that width. With aspect ratio lock enabled, right, then what it's going to do is as it resizes, it's going to adjust that height as well. So you want to consider how that behavior is going to relate to you. So I had a great question. Does that remove all auto layout from the selected frame or from the whole file? It removes all auto layout from the selected frame, and it looks within all of the nested instances. So if you have that complex auto layout here, where you have rows and you have columns kind of constructing the auto layout, remove all auto layout will go into all of those nested frames and remove them. That's a great question. All right. So now we're going to go into just like a little bit more understanding of auto layout as we are starting to level up and get to that point of creating frames. I think I ruined something in here. There's some weird stuff going on with this frame. Let me unlock that. Unlock selection. Let me unlock all objects. That's weird. I wonder, probably when I was moving stuff over, it kind of like broke this, but that's fine. All right. So when we're talking about auto layout, right, we're thinking about three respective things. We're thinking about horizontal layout, we're thinking about vertical layout, and then wrap. So when you are applying a horizontal layout, you want objects to wrap around. That's how that's going to work. All right, cool. So someone asked me really quick, how do I bring up the search function? Once again, Command K. If you come down here, the icon may look a little different for you based on whether or not you're going to have AI enabled. But when you type in Command K, that is going to be the give you the ability to search for any function in Figma. So like, let's say if you wanted to look up keyboard shortcuts, I could type in keyboard shortcuts, type that in, and then I can get all the keyboard shortcuts. Let me close that out. Cool. All right. So when we're talking about direction, we need to think about the directionality of an object. So at this point, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show you a very basic um, button that can be made with auto layout. So if you were, I'm going to show you this example here, right? So if you were to just take some text, right? I press the T key, I clicked on the canvas, and I say, button, let's make that text black. And I can put this inside of a frame. So I could press the F key. I could draw out a frame. It's going to place that text inside of the frame. Now, if I want this to be a button that grows with that text, so many of you should be familiar with this now, but when I press Shift A, it's going to add auto layout to this frame. When it does so, you're going to see the auto layout options. The auto layout options are going to highlight here. When I hover over those fields, right, I'm actually going to see demonstrated on the canvas. It's telling me everything that's going on. So when I hover over that field, I can see that the text is currently set to hug. And what I mean by hug, it means the outside frame is hugging the inside context. So if I say monthly workshop, right, that frame is going to grow because it's hugging the inside contents. So I'm going to say this is a button. And now I can begin to modify these properties. You'll notice that it's going horizontal. It just has that one object. If I add in like another anything into this, so let's say I draw a little circle, I could draw that circle, I can add it right into that button, and you'll see that as more things are added, it's going to grow its width because it's hugging its contents. And there's going to be instances where the surrounding frame is going to hug the contents, and that means it's going to grow with it, or there's going to be instances where the surrounding frame determines the width of the contents inside. So this is going to be the concept of resizing. So here, right now, when I select that frame, the text field that's inside determines its outside size. Now, if I change that behavior from hug contents of that frame instead to fixed width, now when I change the width of my box, right, that's going to impact the text on the inside. Now, this is where the resizing of a text field also comes into play, where we've already discussed, okay, is my text set to auto width? Because it's set to auto width, it's kind of like unphased, right? And also, the text field itself is set to hug. So if instead I select that text field and I set it to auto height, and I set that text field on the inside from a fixed width to a fill container, right? You can even see when I hover over that field on the canvas, those little red arrows pointing in those opposite directions, telling me how it behaves. So now the inside is dependent on the outside, right? So that's the way that you want to think about it. It's either the outside is dependent on the inside, or the inside is dependent on the outside. So auto layout is applied to the frame around the text. Auto layout properties are on this frame. So right now, the outside width, the resizing is currently set to fixed. That means I determine its width. The inside content, that text field, is currently set to fill. That means it's dependent on its parent. So when I resize this, you see that that text is going to grow depending upon the outside. So those fill values are going to be independent on whether or not they're set to the horizontal or the vertical properties. So likewise, if I was to, let's say I duplicate this, right? I just want y'all to see how this works. So if I were to drop, let's say, 3 little circles inside of here and I paste them inside of that frame, right? Those circles right now, they are all set to fixed width. That means their width is not being affected by anything. And you'll see that there. Actually, let me make these little rectangles. Rectangles are going to be better. Or actually, no, you know what? Let's keep it these. And I'll show you really quick right here, the alignment. So right now they could be aligned to the left, they could be aligned to the right, they could be aligned to the center, or you could press X and then they'll have auto spacing in between, right? And then that means that the more space that they have, they'll kind of fill that space. But all right. So what we want to do here is we want to begin thinking about auto layout. So you have a frame, and what you could do is you could press Shift A on this frame, and then that's going to make this button, right? Then what we do is we move this over here. As you type in text, right, that button is going to grow because the outside is set to hug and the inside is set to fixed. That means that the inside is determining how wide the outside is. Now, when you have a bunch of these all set up, when you select them all and press Shift A, right, each of these inside nested buttons have auto layout applied. So each one is hugging their contents, but now they're wrapped inside of an auto layout wrap container. So this is basically a horizontal stack. But then as I resize this down, if there's no more space for them, they then are then distributed into rows. So you can see when there's not enough horizontal space, they're then broken out into rows, and the gap between the rows and the columns of those objects is then adjustable. So when I select that frame, I can hop over here. I could even add in padding around them all. So I could add in 16 padding for the gap. I could add 16, and maybe for the rows, I add 16. And I could see the spacing around this, right? The spacing around them, and it's all sort of visualized. And when more space is then provided for them, then I'm able to move them. So is the wrapping automatic? When you apply auto layout, auto layout is going to try to guess at what you're doing. So if you have a row of objects, it's going to know, oh, hey, you have a row. If you have a column of objects, it's going to say, oh, hey, you have a column. So let's say I have a few rectangles, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then I press Shift A, it's going to align them and say, hey, you're a column, right? If I have these objects and they're kind of arranged like a single row, right? Close enough, and I press Shift A, it's going to say, "Hey, you're a row," and then you're going to have this third option, which is wrap. So when you turn on wrap, it's basically going to say, "Hey, do you fit in this row? If not, when I resize, do I then push you down to the next item down?" And then this alignment tool over here determines where they get wrapped. Are they wrapping to the center? Are they wrapping to the right? Or are they wrapping from the left? Cool. So once again, you can see how this is then applied. And once again, we're thinking about this in terms of responsiveness. You want to think of the options that you have available and the way that they may behave using kind of like modern layout. So once again, the way that suggest auto layout works is that it's going to look and try to find the pattern within your design. If it's going to look for that vertical, a horizontal row, another vertical row. So when you're performing the suggest auto layout, or if you're creating your own complex nested layout structure, sometimes it's helpful to kind of create a scaffolding for how it may behave. So in the same way that, I'm kind of drawing out, like a rectangle, maybe I have, like a row here of objects, then I might even begin to think about my text. Sometimes thinking about that construction will then get you, a little bit closer to what it is you're trying to accomplish. So I might think of these as two independent structures. I might think of this as a row. So I can select these items together and I press Shift A for an auto layout frame, and I can say that this is a row. I can select these three, Shift A, and you can see that this here is a column, right? And then, I might even think of this structure, right? Like this is an image, but maybe these are kind of working together, right? And then this is like its own structure. So if I'm thinking about this going from like the left and then going underneath it, right? I need to maybe consider that as its own vertical stack. So I can auto lay out that and I'll say vertical stack, and then these two together to create the whole card. So Shift A and type in a card. And I can do that again. So when I look at that sort of scaffolded structure, right? So I have the whole card. This is my image, right? I have this stack here. And then I can begin to think about how I want it to behave responsively. When I increase the width, I could see that this structure, when I look at its current width resizing, it's set to fill the container, right? So this rectangle is set to fill container. So it's looking at the outside card for its determined height or width. Then here too, when I double click in, I can see that this column is currently set to fill container. I can remove that, and so it's hug, or if I drag it all the way, if you take a quick look at my cursor, you'll see that by extending it all the way, snapping it on the right, you look under my cursor, it says fill. So there's going to be shortcuts to the behaviors that you might want it to behave. So fill means the outside container affects the inside container. Hug means the inside container affects the outside container. All right. So let's you'll see I'm resizing this, and this might not be behaving the same way. So I can set this container to fill, and then maybe the inside objects, let's work with that alignment that I showed you. We can either align them to the center, or if we press the X key here, the X key is going to take the padding and set it to auto. And what that means is that instead of having the objects resize, we're just going to treat that padding to kind of grow. And so I can just type in auto, and you'll see that now when I'm resizing this, how they behave. And then if I want this image to maintain that aspect ratio, I could come over here, turn on aspect ratio, and I can see how that behaves. And I could even set the ones in here to wrap. And so if there's not enough space, they'll wrap down. So these are the sorts of behaviors you're going to be thinking about as you begin to construct your component. And likewise, if I was to make this a UI card, I can select that whole frame. And then this is where I can add in the padding. So we have here our horizontal padding, our vertical padding. I'd like to apply all padding at once and then make adjustments. So if I command click or control click on Windows, I can edit all the padding at the same time. I could type in 24. Maybe that's a bit too much. Let's move that back. Let's say 8 padding, uh, command click once again. I can see all those values there. Let's do 16. And you'll see that there's no background currently set. When we select the card, we can come down here, we can add a fill, and we can see the card starting to come into fruition. For can I select? Yeah, you can always have like a frame and then add elements inside of a frame, and then make auto layout. So it's not necessarily that you have to just select the objects and create the frame. You can also already begin to arrange the objects inside of a frame as you're creating that auto layout. And once again, it's just a matter of whether or not that outside frame, how its resizing is set, whether it's set to fixed or hug contents. So do I turn aspect ratio lock off? So the thing about aspect ratio lock, the reason you may want it on is because if you're going to include like an image fill. So right now I have an image fill here. If I turn that off when resizing the card, you see that it's kind of cropping the image in a way that might not be how it's going to behave in like a web browser or in an app. So what I can do is I can change the behavior of that. Let's say this image is currently like 3, let's say, uh, depending on like the width, let's just turn that on. I'm going to change the height here. So there we go. So like, let's say 268 by like 200, I enable aspect ratio lock. And then, oops, you want to make sure that that object is set to fill container. Um, and then I can resize it. It'll keep that size. Now, if at any point you need to make an adjustment, you don't want to go over here, turn it off. Let's say you want it temporarily deactivated. You can hold the control key, and it'll ignore aspect ratio lock. And then once I let go, oops, uh, then once I let go, aspect ratio lock is turned on again. So if you need to edit this, you don't necessarily have to turn off aspect ratio lock. You can hold the control key, extend the height, and then generate that. And then if you wanted to add another orange box, you can just press Command D and add another orange box. Command D, Command D, Command D, and you'll see that it continues to add those elements inside. So if you want to add any elements to the auto layout, if I was to, let's say I want to add in some text. So that was a great question. Hello, I am some text. Let's make that text black. And let's set this to like an auto height. I can just grab it and I can drop it in. When you go to add something to auto layout, you'll see this little blue line giving you an indicator of where it may be going. And you can also see on the left-hand side where it's going respective to your existing layers. So I could just throw that text right in there. I can remove it. And that's going to be the value of auto layout, is that as you're adding things in and you're moving things around, there will be adjustments. And if you want to make any other adjustments to, like, let's say the padding, you can make those adjustments there. So what is the Windows equivalent to Command D? Control D. Control D is going to be the duplicate option on Windows. And once again, I have this field in here. I can determine how it behaves. Currently, this text field is going to be set to fixed width. That means that nothing is going to affect its width. Even if I make this card very small, right? The text is like, screw you, I am fixed. This is where I am. This is what I'm going to do. However, I can change that behavior to fill container. And now that it's inside and now that it's fill container, that text is then going to be responsive to its container. And you can even see here, these elements, if I want them aligned to the left, I could press the X key, move them to the left, and then they'll kind of behave like those little buttons there. All right, so auto layout, once again, you want to be kind of mindful. It's going to be an intentionality thing. You want to test out a card, see how it behaves, right? There's going to be times where right now everything is kind of determined by the width, right? And that's a pretty common approach where we're thinking about the available width and how that impacts the card. I'm going to show our next concept here. I'm going to copy that card. I'm going to come down here and we're going to talk about minimum width and maximum width, because we want to get into kind of building the component and starting to think about how we can assign and ascribe component properties in the making of that. So I'm going to paste this like little example that we sort of worked on right here. And we're going to talk about min, width, and height. So when we are creating our component, or we're making our auto layout, you can see I could just keep on going forever. And that might not be the case. What we may want to do is apply some, I was going to say constraints, but constraints is a different concept. What we want to do is apply some limits. So let's say I'm working here, right, in my card, and I'm going to select this card right here, the image itself. I'm going to come over to the width. Once again, I'm going to take note that its width is set to fill container. You're going to see that demonstrated on the canvas too. I do want to just kind of note that oftentimes people don't really pay attention what's going on the canvas in terms of what you're editing over here in the design panel, but there's a lot that's actually being surfaced to you. So I could see that when I set this to fill container, right, I could see how that's behaving. Now there's these two options that sit just beneath that, right? Add min width and add max width. So if I apply here, add max width, I can say that I don't want the width of this image to exceed a value. So here, let's say its current width, right? I could set it to the current width and I can remove the max width. This set to current width is pretty helpful because sometimes I go to set my max width and I don't have a sense of scale. I'm like, crap, should that be 420? Should it be 480? 500? I can't remember. So if I set it to the current width, I'm like, oh, 359. Maybe I want to go a little bit wider than this, right? So I could type in, let's say 480. And that's then visualized on the canvas. I can see what the maximum width for that image is. So now when I'm expanding the width of this, I see it kind of stop out at that size. Yes, kind of like a breakpoint. So when I'm expanding the width, right, it's hitting that size. And I can also do the same for its minimum. But for now, let's just think about that maximum and what that means. So here on this card, let's say, I'm going to add this in. I'll show you another shortcut too. I feel like y'all like the shortcuts. If I hold the control key, I'm sorry, the command key, control key on Windows, I can deep nest objects further into nested auto layout. So what I mean by that is when I drag this, right now I could just put this above and below, but let's say I want to nest it inside, in between these two objects. If I hold the command key, now I could put it right dead smack in the middle of there. And so now these are all together. It's a great shortcut. Now that these are set up, let's say I too want to apply a maximum width here to match this. So I'm going to click I could see our max width was 480 on this image. Let's apply a max width here as well. Max width of 480. There we go. And now the value in this isn't going to be in the vertical layout, but if we instead made this a wrapped layout, and now as a wrapped layout, you'll see that when there is that we can place these objects next to each other, but then we can also use minimum values to determine whether or not they're going to step back down. So here, I'm going to add in, I'm going to change that max width to 640. And then I'm going to apply a min width of 480. Right. And so when we have that minimum width enabled, oh no, why isn't this should be set to wrap? Set to wrap, should be left. And oh, I need a minimum width here too. All right, cool. My bad. Let's apply a minimum width on this object as well. And so we're going to add a min width of 480 and a max width of 640. And so now when I resize, you'll see that there's going to be this juncture where the minimum width is going to be set there. And then we can kind of go down a little bit smaller. So if you want the image to be on the right side, you can move the image onto the right side. So you can use the left or right key to basically rearrange it at those points. So like, let's say if you're like working on this component, or if you're even just like working on the concept, what you can do is begin to think about like how that may get stacked. And then here, even at this size, we can change that alignment using the alignment tool. And I can then determine that they're on the left, but left of center or left of bottom, or even like right of bottom, or kind of centered within that container. And I can apply different minimums. So as I'm adjusting this, I might go in and I might adjust the minimums that I'm working with. So I could set those minimums a little bit smaller. And then I could see how that then impacts my design. So someone mentioned that they tried to insert text into the auto layout frame and it pushed the other text out. Check the resizing on the text that it's set either to auto height, and check the hug of the card. So if your auto layout, right now the vertical is set to hug. And what that means is that the content is determining the height. So if the height was not set to hug, but instead fixed, that means that the content is probably going to push out other content outside of the frame. So if you're experiencing this type of an issue, it could be that the parent auto layout container isn't currently set to hug. That vertical hug is what's going to allow all this stuff to stack. So if I were to duplicate these frames, they're going to continue to stack. Great. So in the remaining time that we have, I actually do want to make sure I get to the components aspect of the demo. So I'm going to head on over to the auto layout component, and I'm going to begin to walk through how to set this up. Right. So the way that this is working is like we kind of built out some like little components here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a button component. We're going to create a relatively simple button component. I know that you can create very complex button components, but what we're going to do is create a very simple one. So I'm going to type some text onto the canvas. I'm going to name it button, and I'm just going to highlight certain aspects of this as I create it. Right now, the resizing for this is set to auto width. I'm going to press Shift A. That's going to wrap it inside of a frame. If we look over here to the right, I'm going to just say example button. we'll see that the text field is currently set to auto width. It's placed inside of the auto layout frame, which is now hugging it. So if I give that a fill, let's make that blue, right? That's applied. Now I can apply corner radius to that, select the frame, go to the design panel, go down to appearance, find corner radius. We're going to apply that as like a value of 8. And we can see that here with the button. I'm going to make this into a component. A component, once again, is reusable. Once I make the component, it then will be available in the assets panel. There it is. I could drag in instances of this button, or you could just duplicate it right there on the canvas. Now you can override that just by double clicking inside, and you can add in some text. Now, the first concept that we're going to talk about relative to making these components are component properties. So when I select that text, I can come over here and I can create a new component property. And what that means is that this will now be surfaced in the instances, giving you the ability to easily edit those values. So I'm going to call the name button text, and the value right now is going to be button. Let's create that property. What that means is that now each of these instances, because this is the main component, this instance now has a field here that allows you to more easily edit it. So I can say coffee right here. I can just type in and I could say espresso, right? And that just makes it a lot easier to deal with. This way you don't have to go in, click the field, manually type in those values. Also, these can then be more readily tied into variables. It used to be that component properties and variables didn't play well together, but now you can ascribe that component property and then change it into the variable, which is going to be a little outside of the scope for the remainder of the demo. But we have our instances here. Now, if I was to have a number of these arranged, I can select them all and I can make this into an auto layout frame as well. I can press Shift A and I can name this my tag cloud. And now, because the way that I created it, it recognized those two rows, it's going to automatically create it as a wrap. And when I resize this, you'll see that the resizing of this frame is currently set to fixed. All of those inside components now wrap. And what we're going to do is we're going to start to put this inside of a larger component. I'm going to draw a rectangle. Now, I know some people really like drawing frames for place holding their images. It's kind of annoying to me. I prefer a rectangle because I can select this rectangle. I'm going to come over here in the design panel, go to fill. And when I click, there's going to be this option here that's image. When I do that, it's more readily understood as a placeholder image. So I could see the gray background. When I resize it, it's kind of behaving that way. And it's a good way to implement this for use as a component because we're going to replace the image eventually. So here, I'm going to throw in a little corner radii, like let's say 16. So we now have like the image, we have like a small tag cloud, and let's add in some paragraph text. I'm going to just cheat and use AI. I'm going to say, rewrite this. Write me a sentence about coffee. I'm going to rewrite that. Putting those LLMs to use. There we go, done. Coffee is a delightful beverage that awakens a sense and fuels creativity. Now, once again, always want to pay attention to the resizing of a text field. I drew this text field out and you'll see that it's currently fixed. We do want it to be auto height. A way to make that text field behave auto height, just extend that height and then double click. And now you'll see it is set to auto height. Show you that one more time. If the text field is set to width, fixed, which we don't want because if it's set to fixed, right, the text can go outside of that width and it's not going to work well inside the component. We're just going to double click that bottom line and it'll now be set to auto height. So that's going to be a good one for y'all. All right, so we're going to build out this component really quick. I'm going to select all three of these objects. I'm going to press Shift A. Shift A is going to place them into an auto layout frame. I'm going to name this card. So this is currently, when I resize it, you're going to see that not everything behaves the way that we want to. Let's just make our text black really quick. I'm going to select that card. I'm going to give it a background fill of white so we can kind of see it there. if we want to adjust the padding, right? The padding, all of that is going to be on the properties of the card, right? So we select the card. Here's all of our properties. There's padding. I'm going to type in a value of 24, maybe too much. Let's go 16. Try to keep it simple. And then the inside bits, we want them to all fill the container. I'll show you a fun little shortcut for that. Actually, you just grab it, snap it, and see it fill, right? That's totally going to work. But another way that you can do that, if you have like a ton of stuff you all want them to fill, if you press enter, it'll select all the children. Now that all the children are selected, we can set that to fill container. We're probably going to go about 5 minutes past the hour, Alex. Hopefully that's okay. I know I said right at the hour, but we have a little bit of time. So now they're all set to fill. We can select this object, now set it to constrain proportions. And our card itself, let's apply some corner radii of 16. Let's make it 24. There we go. So we have our little card. And so we have all of those objects filling. So when we resize, we can see how that behaves. Now here too, we can apply we could set this property too. We're going to make this into a component. Let's make this into a card component. We have our card component. This text too, let's say we want to make it a property. So I'm going to click plus. There's no property available. Create property text. I'm going to call it body. And we're going to create that property, right? And now let's say this image, let's say maybe we want to create it as optional that this image is there. I can go to my card. I can come over here. I can create a new property and I'm going to create this property that's a Boolean and I'm going to have this be show image. And by default, it's going to be true. So that means that now I can go to the image. I can come down here and I can basically use that property on whether or not this is available. So in appearance, you can click show image, right? So now the image is available. And when we have an instance of it, so we have a copy of it, right? I could turn show image on or off, right? And I can even change this text here too. Love this card right now. And then the last thing that we could do is, let's say I want to surface up some of these variables here, right? We can go into the card. We could find some nested instances and we have these example buttons if we want to make that text available. So now here on this card, we could change everything. So I could change the various tags available. So I could say that this is Americano, right? And then these now too, down the road, you can ascribe those to be various variables if you want to adjust that as well. We could see that this is kind of responsive. And once again, we can begin to think about sort of min and max values affecting how those get adjusted. All right, so here I can even just make adjustments on the spacing. And once you have a number of these cards applied, so let's say I have 3 cards, I can put them into auto layout, Shift A. I can replace the content. So it's going to find the content, kind of change them all up, which is kind of fun. I can add in some additional ones. And then even those items on the card itself, I can set like a maximum width. So here I can say that those cards have a max width of 400. And so here, when I'm extending this width, I could change it to row. And then if I then apply a minimum width, let's add a minimum width of 320, right? We can then see, they'll start to move over and around. All right, so we're unfortunately out of time. Hopefully you found this helpful. Alex, do you have any questions? I think we can answer 1 or 2 questions.
Miggy, we do, but I promise to hold you to an hour. So what we can do is maybe we can do a follow-up video and answer some of these questions.
All right, brilliant. That sounds great.
Awesome. Y'all, thank you so much for joining us today. What we ask of you is before you leave to give us some feedback, let us know how this session was for you, give us ideas about future workshops, and just let us know how we're doing. The other thing I'll say is that next month's workshop is going to be deep dive into prototyping in Figma. So Miggy is going to go deep on prototyping and answer all of your questions. I just threw a link in the chat for you to RSVP. And like we've mentioned throughout the session was recorded. So look out for a copy of the recording within about a week. It'll be posted both to YouTube and be sent to you directly via email for you to enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And as mentioned, take a look through the file, deconstruct, start to see how these are made, and then feel free to follow up with any questions. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you at the next workshop.
Awesome. Thanks for coming, everyone. Migs, let's close it out.
All right. Thank you all so much. Happy designing.